Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 176 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, and that is Gavin. Gavin, how's little baby Ignis?
Little baby Ignis is doing great. She had a very funny thing right before we started recording, actually.
Oh, really?
So she was hanging out on the floor. We have like a little archway with some dangly things over it, as babies like. And she was getting a little fussy, so I went to pick her up. Handed her to Liz because I was getting ready to come in here to record, and she was giving me the biggest smiles, and then let out the largest adult man sounding burp I've ever heard. And then the smile got bigger.
As well it should. If you can pull something like that off, you have entirely deserved it.
Yeah. So that's been one of the highlights of my day. I'm off this week. That's one of the nice parts in higher education, is that this being the week of American Thanksgiving, I have the entire week off, which is pretty sick, without needing to spend vacation time, which is the real kicker.
Yep. And being in lower education, I still have to work Monday, Tuesday, and then I am out after that.
Yeah, Mike's going international.
I am going international, but I don't know. Do we want to? I'm trying to think if I want to put out a clue to let people guess where I'm going. The problem is I have no idea what clue I could possibly give.
He may or may not be seeing a large U.S. military presence in the area.
Yeah, yes. That's going to wildly mislead some people, but you know what?
It's going to very wildly mislead some people.
Honestly, yeah. So if you can guess where I'm headed, that may also have a large U.S. military presence. Drop a comment. Winner gets some free I Wish You Were Dead merch.
Sure, I think we may be able to make that happen. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, we don't have merch right now, but we can make some. So before we get started, Gavin, do you have some housekeeping for us?
I sure do. Don't forget to rate the show on whatever platform you listen to us on, and make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Those are the best ways to give us feedback about the show, and to suggest any future topics you'd like to hear on the show. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, make sure to fill out the guest form down below in the show notes. Next episode, we are talking about a fun little time period. We're continuing our last sort of home stretch of all the different sections of Earth history. We're going to be moving on into the Pliocene. Real recent time, all things considered. Only, between 5.333 million years ago and 2.58 million years ago. So quite recent.
That's just yesterday from our perspective.
More or less, yeah.
On this podcast.
Yeah, so we'll be talking about that next episode in 2 weeks.
Beautiful. Well, we're going to be looking forward to that. Fia is off this week. She's got, I don't even know what Fia, I assume it's something more important, because it always is.
Yeah, well, I think initially she said she was visiting family because it's, Thanksgiving time.
Yep.
But then also earlier today was like, hey, my laptop also decided to die.
That one as well, yes.
So thankfully her dissertation data is safe, which is far more important than joining us for this episode. But yes, thankfully it is safe and backed up well. So that's
but if you're wondering where she is, everything is fine with her. We look forward to having her back hopefully in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Mike, in the meantime, for us? I believe for today's in history, we got, I think we got 2 things here to talk about. So we're talking about November 26th in history. Sure. First thing, in 1791, we have the first U.S. cabinet meeting. Now, do you think you can name the members of the first cabinet of the United States?
Probably
There's 2 that are easy.
Probably not all of them. But I've seen Hamilton.
Yes.
So obviously George Washington was there.
Correct.
Jefferson.
Yes.
Hamilton.
Yes.
Madison.
No.
Okay, so he was just there in the musical. I know he wasn't in the cabinet.
Correct. He was not in the cabinet. There was a separate meeting between him, with him and Jefferson, but it was not part of the cabinet meeting.
Then that's all I got. I assume the vice president is there as well.
The vice president was not there, at least not according to this. And if you ever read any quotes of John Adams talking about his time in the vice presidency, sure doesn't sound like that guy did anything for 8 years.
I mean, is that not tradition? for vice presidents?
It's one of those things where it is both true now and also it was so much like less important even way back in the day where you just like you really weren't doing a whole lot of anything.
Well, and especially then, I don't think like George Washington, I don't think was particularly young when he was president, but he sure wasn't pushing 80 like our presidents tend to get today. So I feel like just the job was less important back then.
Yeah, it's a little more about breaking ties in the Senate if they happen to exist. And besides that, I don't know, maybe he was going on some podcasts as well.
Sure.
The other two members of the cabinet at that point were Secretary of War Henry Knox and the Attorney General Edmund Randolph.
There was only 4?
Only 4 on the original 4
interesting
cabinet positions, yeah. And that lasts for a little while. In addition, I believe this should be 1924 if I can find out where it happened again. But in the 20th century, where did that one go? Here we go. 1922, I'm sorry. Archaeologist Howard Carter did something. Do you know what Howard Carter did, Gavin?
I'm not familiar, no.
He was the guy that opened up Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt, nearly intact. And while Tutankhamun himself does not appear to be particularly notable in Egyptian history, it has kind of attained this mythical status.
Yeah, it really kicked off just in Western media a lot of like
Egyptology,
fascination with Egypt and its history.
Just because of how well preserved and how well intact that tomb was. And that may be a subject that we do I Wish You Were Dead about. That might be a Mike Takes the Wheel episode at some point.
Yeah.
Because that's always been kind of cool for me.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk a bit about Egypt today. Just a couple mentions here and there. Because today, where you finished, I don't want to segue too readily.
The only other thing I was going to bring up is the fact that I know I've mentioned this on the last couple of podcasts, but today, Foster Dog is sitting next to me and he's tearing up some rope. So if you hear that rope being pulled apart, adopt that dog and you won't have to deal with it anymore.
Future Gavin will do his best in editing. We'll see.
That is all I got. Hopefully it's not too terribly bad for anybody here. But now, Gavin, what are we talking about today that involves a little bit of Egypt?
Yeah, so today we're talking about domestication. And it's kind of a loaded term.
My sister has applied that to me whenever I have a girlfriend, that I become more domesticated. Which has happened twice in my life. So,
yeah,
is that what we're talking about?
No, not in that context.
Okay.
We all have kind of heard the term referring to mostly animals, although as we'll talk about, it does happen with plants as well. But basically nobody really kind of fully understands its implications. Frankly, even scientists.
Is it like nobody besides Gavin at this point, or?
No, I am very much excluded from people who understand domestication. And so Mike, in the layperson's understanding, what is domestication?
So I'm trying to remember, because I believe I watched a CGP Grey video about this.
Okay. Very good channel. Back. Very good content.
I wish he would do more instead of just changing the titles of his current videos to get more views. But the videos themselves, I think, are largely well done. So what do we need for domestication? It's got to be something that I don't want to say listens to humans, because that's more like if you have a dog.
Hey, corn has ears.
Wow. Wow. Domestic. I'm gonna use like a very broad term.
Sure.
Something that has been brought under human control, for the benefit of humans. An animal that's been brought under human control on a evolutionary or reproduction scale for the benefit of humans is going to be my definition.
Okay. I mean, for like a general use description, like that's as good as you could want, reasonably, I think.
Perfect. All right.
So domestication is a very poorly defined term.
Yes.
Basically, every piece of academic literature that you will see about domestication starts with something to the effect of how poorly defined it is. Mostly because it arguably is something that is undefinable for reasons that we will get to later.
Looking forward to that.
So, the definition we'll be using just as sort of our general use for the rest of this episode, is a multi-generational relationship in which one species basically takes control over another species in a mutualistic way. Specifically specifically taking control of its care, but also its evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's break that down. Multi-generational. You can't domesticate an individual. So like you go out, find wild what's a wild animal?
A boar.
Sure. Let's use something that hasn't been domesticated.
Giraffe.
Sure, a giraffe. You go out, get a giraffe, you put it in an enclosure, you like herd it, use a dog to like corral it into a pen or something. And even if it becomes relatively friendly to you, that is not domesticated. That is tame.
Okay.
Those are different things. An individual can become tamed.
Okay.
But a population or a like species-wide thing, population is probably the better term, becomes domesticated.
So if you had a single animal, a single giraffe that, you trained to pick apples for you, you would have tamed that giraffe.
Right.
But being able to like have an entire like fleet of giraffes be bred for the purpose of animal picking, that would be domestication. Right. And I imagine that's significantly harder. I imagine that domestication...
Well, and even the example you gave, iffy.
Really?
For reasons that are not clearly defined. We'll sort of close with that in this episode.
All right, well then please continue.
Sure. And so, that's multi-generational. If you... the example I had in my notes here was you find a baby bear that was abandoned by its mom or something. You raise it up to be friendly and not eat your face. It is not domesticated. That's still a wild animal, just one that is used to humans.
Okay.
The next part of that definition, mutualistic. That is a type of symbiotic relationship where both sides benefit. I give my dog food and shelter. I have a golden retriever. She gives me a companion and, at least theoretically, some level of protection. My dog is the nicest dog on the planet, so that's why I say theoretically.
Lottie, right?
What's that?
Lottie, right?
Yes.
Is the name of your dog? Yes.
Yeah. So she does not provide us with too much protection, although now that her hearing she's getting a little older, her hearing isn't as good as it used to be. So sometimes she does bark at random noises, which I guess does, sort of provide at least a little bit of an alarm.
It's protecting somebody.
Yeah, so it's like they're both sides. It's a give and take. That what the animal receives in that benefit might not always necessarily be clear at first glance. Clearly, humans are getting something out of it, even if it's just companionship and joy. What the animal is getting out of it may or may not be clear immediately. After you have to kind of dig into it, and we'll talk about it.
And it could be something just as simple as having the food and water provided.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then control, and this is where it gets a little wonky. What exactly does control mean? Because the two examples I gave were of its care and its evolution. So let's kind of look at that. Some examples of that.
Sure.
So the most classic example is dogs and wolves. So think of a dog, for example, a pug. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then think of a wolf.
Yes.
They have vague similarities, but the wolf...
4 legs, snout, not much.
Right. The wolf looks much more like other wild dogs, like coyotes, African painted dogs, than it does to that little ball of skin folds and mucus. Full offense to pugs. They are terrible dogs.
Couldn't agree more.
If they're purebred. Our department has a department puggle owned by one of our faculty members. She's great. She can breathe fine. Purebred pugs can't, and that's why they're bad.
Any of those dogs that are little yippy that just spin around and yip whenever somebody new walks near them, that's my one swear word for the episode, by the way.
Sure.
Any of those dogs, not interested.
Yeah. But if you look at the genetics, domestic dogs and gray wolves are nearly identical. There are differences, obviously, but all that difference in appearance has been because humans have guided the evolution of domestic dogs so completely that in only a few thousand years, they have experienced changes that natural selection either wouldn't select for in the first place, or that have happened infinitely faster than natural selection could realistically like replicate. And so,
I mean, and that's got to be like one of the, I don't know if I want to call it one of the bigger successes of humans, because I don't think there was like people in a meeting that sat down and thought, hey, this is what we're going to do.
At least not.
But it is an incredible undertaking that we've done this.
Yeah. And so some I think even clearer examples besides pugs are some breeds of dogs, like a lot of bulldogs, like French or English bulldogs. They cannot reproduce without human help.
Really?
They need to be artificially inseminated, and they have to give birth via C-section. They can't have like a natural birth. So
That's insane.
By definition, if you can't reproduce viable offspring on your own, natural selection will not select for that feature or features that will get you to that point, right? So those could not exist in nature, at least the way they are now. Another example, since I'm going to try to weave plants in as much as I can here, because it is easy to forget that we have domesticated tons of plants too. Many plants, especially like cereal grains, so that's like wheat, corn, rye, barley, rice, they have larger seeds than their wild variants, and basically skip the part of their life cycle where the seeds get dispersed. Both of those things make them less able to produce or reproduce if fully left to their own devices, but it makes them much easier to farm. So we spread the seeds for them. And so what control mostly means is that in exchange for humans caring for them, the domesticated species generally becomes less biologically fit in the wild, less able to produce viable offspring.
Sure.
But become easier for us to get what we want from them, which in the end actually makes them more biologically fit because we take over that process for them. They can produce lots of babies because they have all their needs met, and they don't need to have all the struggles of life in the wild.
And they have humans helping them along.
Exactly.
I did actually just think of a question.
Sure.
As you were going through that. I think in my definition, I talked about how this was like, humans do this. Are there any examples of any other species domesticating something else? Is that a thing that exists with such a poorly defined term? Okay.
We will get there. There aren't many, but there are some.
Okay. No spoilers.
Yeah. All right. So first, let's look at some traits that sort of show what happens when something gets domesticated, because some of them are really interesting. So first, at least in animals, and this is generally mammals, that's what we've domesticated the most of. There are some things that we've domesticated, like chickens and pigeons and things like that. Not that many reptiles, honestly. So this is mostly mammals. So first, most obvious, they become friendlier to people. They don't run from us and or kill us right away.
Beautiful.
Obviously, this varies a lot from individual to individual. But generally, even feral domestic cats and dogs don't mind being around humans and will sometimes even seek us out. Like if you've ever just had like an alley cat come up to you when you're like walking to your car on the street, like that very well could be a feral cat. Sometimes feral cats do just like walk up to you and be like, hey, how you doing?
They have been bred to, seek out humans for, as you said, hundreds, thousands of years. It's not that surprising.
Yeah. Domesticated animals generally are smaller than their wild relatives. Some exceptions do exist, like Clydesdale horses, for example. We bred those specifically to be really, really big. So when we breed them to be that way, they can be bigger, but generally they get smaller. Mostly because, they don't need to be big to survive anymore. This one seems to be purely part of the genetics, just like a weird quirk, and we'll talk a little bit about it toward the end. They get floppy ears. That's, like I said, just kind of a side effect, but it happens pretty universally in domesticated mammals. Dogs, pigs, goats, several types of cows that we've domesticated, because we've domesticated several species of cow in various places around the world. They have a much higher variability in fur patterns. For example, I have 2 cats that are mostly white. Having white fur outside of like a snowy environment is generally pretty bad, because it makes you a lot easier to see, so you can't catch food as easily, and you become food more easily.
Mm-hmm.
So in nature, that would not be selected for, but for us, we might even just think it looks cool, so then it gets selected for. Not just a coincidence. It's like, oh, we like that, so that's what we're going to make.
It is actually an advantage. Yeah. Yes.
And generally, the retention of juvenile features and behaviors. Domesticated species generally look and act like juveniles of their wild ancestors and cousins. That's why, like, you know, dogs, like, that's not to say, like, adult wolves don't play. But adult, like, my dog is 10. You know, she will chase a ball all day long. And I don't think that's the case, really, with adult wolves.
They've got other things they need to do.
Right. Or that's just a behavior that is, you know, more in associated with wolf pups or juvenile wolves. Mm-hmm. And there are some other examples of this as well, but it's easiest to talk about this with dogs because pretty much everybody has some kind of frame of reference with dogs.
Absolutely.
So again, so those are just some general traits that happen in domesticated mammals. In plants, like I said earlier, they tend to hold on to their seeds and also fruits for a lot longer than their wild versions. Some plant species have become completely reliant on humans for their pollination. So that basically is the plant equivalent of some of those dogs that can't reproduce on their own.
The part of them holding onto their seeds for longer almost seems counterintuitive. Like, you would almost think that humans would want them to make seeds sooner so that we could use those seeds sooner to make more, like...
Well, so in plants, in wild plants, their biological incentive is as soon as the seeds are large enough to survive on their own, get them out of here. Mm-hmm. Whereas if that happens in domesticated plants, that fruit might fall off the tree before the human has a chance to come along and pick it.
I got you. Okay.
Also, in my notes, I have also seedless varieties of plants. If they don't have seeds, that plant is effectively sterile, which would not have success in the wild, at least in terms of like biological fitness and reproducing.
Can you imagine giving like a fruit of vasectomy or something?
Yeah, I don't think that's possible if I'm thinking about it.
That's basically what we did, though.
Right, but not by a surgical procedure, just through many generations of being like, all right, this one happens to have fewer seeds, and just taking that to the extreme.
Darwin's vasectomy.
Let's see. Also, generally higher sugar contents, especially for fruit. We like sugary fruit.
Absolutely.
Lower toxicity. A lot of plants that we eat can be pretty toxic if eaten in large amounts in their wild varieties. So we've bred them to have lower amounts of those toxins. Mm-hmm. Along similar lines, generally fewer physical defenses against predation, like thorns and spikes. And so with that, those are just like the general trends you see in mammals and plants for what happens versus like the wild version compared to the domesticated version. So let's talk about some of the big guns, the big names and things that humans have domesticated. So let's get the obvious few out of the way first. Dogs. Obviously, they were the first ones.
Mentioned on this podcast several times.
Many times. And so we domesticated them. When exactly is a little tough to say. Sometime between 30,000 and 15,000 years ago. Which,
okay,
in the grand scheme of this podcast, that's a very narrow range.
Incredibly recently, and also, yeah, all right,
yeah. We didn't keep terrific records back then, So when exactly we did it, unsure, because the earliest dogs, it's not like they were pugs. So looking at their skeleton, kind of looks like a wolf. So could it have just been a wolf that was tamed, like the earliest ones that we have like a skeleton of? That could have just been an individual tamed wolf. It could have been a wolf that just happened to wander into like a human gravesite, killed somebody, so they buried the person that it killed with it when they buried the human body. Who knows? But
I mean, I imagine it's one of those things. It's like the heap of sand problem. At what point, when you add individual grains of sand, do you get a heap? Like, at what point does this go from like a tame species or something close to
right
an actual domesticate? Like, I imagine that line's really fuzzy.
Oh, very fuzzy. But yeah, and so the domestication of dogs is very complicated, mostly because it is the oldest. And so we don't know if it happened once and then spread, or whether it happened a couple separate times, all like relatively close to each other, that then all sort of combined. We kind of don't know. There's like good lines of evidence both ways, so it could go either way, but we kind of just don't know. But generally, all in that same kind of ballpark time frame, it happened in a couple places around like Central and Eastern Eurasia, so like Western China, Nepal, India, places in that kind of area. Probably started by wolves who just naturally had like a lower fear response, just like individuals that might have been, less fearful in general. They would, come around human campsites to eat, discarded food that humans would just kind of leave around, Those ones that had, those ones got a relatively easy meal. And therefore, the ones with a naturally lower fear response or lower like stress hormone levels would get more food and be better able to pass on those genetics to the next generation. That's probably how it kind of got started. So not in an intentional way.
Right, but just kind of over time, it's one of those things where you are almost not even self-selecting, but accidentally self-selecting for traits that are going to be more what we consider today dog-like.
Yeah,
I guess is the best way to put it.
At least in terms of not running away from humans with fire.
Sure.
Next up in sort of the domestication timeline, wheat and barley. The wheat plant that we domesticated is native to an area known as the Fertile Crescent.
Hey, I remember that.
That's right. That's why they call it that. This is an area broadly encompassing parts of the modern countries of Iraq, Iran, northern Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the country of Georgia, Syria, Israel, Armenia, that kind of like Eastern Mediterranean up through Middle East sort of area. We've been harvesting these plants much longer than that. For like 23,000 years is when we had been just like, hunter-gatherer picking them, But actual domestication happened sometime closer to 12,000 years ago, when we actually started planting them and growing it ourselves. It was around the same time loosely, same time and roughly the same place that we domesticated flax and cannabis. Both plants used, at least initially, to make textiles. So like cloth and rope and things like that. Flax is what you use to make linen. And cannabis is what you use to make hemp. Again, initially. We have since found other uses for that plant. Shortly after that, so we're ballpark 10, 11,000 years ago or so, all very close together were goats, sheep, cows, and pigs across various parts of the Middle East and Asia. Around 9,000 years ago was rice in China. Probably also around then, cats in the Middle East. Chickens were domesticated in East Asia around 7,000 years ago. Likely not for food, but for fighting.
to fight what?
Each other.
I feel like
I did not look more into it because I did most of the research for this episode on my work computer, and I feel like Googling cockfighting on my work computer would be frowned upon. You know I'm going to have to edit that out. Moving on. And the last of the sort of big, major important ones, horses, only around 5,500 years ago in Central Asia. So like Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Western China, that kind of area.
Right.
Those are most of the major ones. Obviously, we've domesticated a ton of other things over the last few thousand years. But those are the ones that went on to become sort of like the main things that we built human civilization around. Also, I thought it was worth noting that all of those that I mentioned, with the possible exception of chickens, those seem like they've been domesticated a couple of times in a couple different places. Those were almost entirely from Eurasia, mostly the Asia side. That's not to say people in other parts of the world weren't domesticating things around this time. For example, corn, potatoes, and tomatoes are all native to the Americas. So, like, the Italians at this time were not making red sauce with their pasta.
I would love to know, like, was it more of a plants thing on the Americas side and an animals thing on the Afro-Eurasian side? Or is that just...
No, because also at this time, so llamas and alpacas, native to South America.
Sure.
Also, I think those came later. You know, those weren't in the, 10,000 ballpark. I think those were considerably more recent than that, but colonization.
But it was still happening, right? Okay.
Things like donkeys, yams, and coffee in Africa, and then lots of different plants used by native Australian and Polynesian communities. They have a ton of unique plants, especially being islands. There's just a lot of different species that are over there that are kind of unique.
Sure.
That they domesticated for various purposes. Those just none of those just seem to take the rest of the world by storm as much as the Eurasian ones did. There's also a lot of things that we don't really think about as being domesticated. For example, silkworms.
Yes.
Those are domesticated. We use those to make silk, which played a massively important role in human history, if you remember anything from your global history class. They don't call it the Silk Road for nothing. Bees, which make crop farming way easier. And then also much more on the recent side of things, laboratory species like mice, rats, fruit flies. There's a small cnidarian genus called Hydra that are commonly used in lab experiments. Yeah, all of those are domesticated primarily for their use in lab experiments. So,
yeah, wow.
How?
I guess I would love to know, like, what the difference, like, genetic, like, what did we do to lab mice to make them more beneficial for us, other than like make them reproduce in an ungodly amount?
I mean, probably also behavioral things as well. Just like not being as afraid or willing to bite people. Although that's not to say they don't. One of my lab partners in college got bit pretty good by a lab mouse. But yeah, I think mostly just making them easier to work with. Because like fruit flies, you're not breeding those to not bite people. They're not going to do that anyway. They're just going to fly away.
Right.
So for them, it's probably more of having the traits that make them easier to experiment on.
Okay.
That's just a guess. I haven't looked much more into it than that.
Sure.
And so how domestication of a species starts really depends a lot on the species. For example, with dogs and cats, as I sort of talked about with dogs a second ago, human settlements probably had some of the stuff that they wanted, mostly food. They also had relative safety. As long as you don't attack the humans or get all up in their space, they'll probably just let you hang out on the outskirts of their little camp, right?
Yeah.
Which leads to the ones who are braver or stupider getting close enough to humans to have more resources, which leads to more babies who are braver/dumber. With most other things, though, it seems like it was at least a bit more intentional on the part of humans.
Right.
So, for example, with plants, over time, again, we didn't write a whole lot of stuff down back then. Over time, we realized that the seeds in plants are the things that make the babies, and they will grow into adult plants if you plant them in the ground.
And once you know that...
Right, then you're like, okay, well, if I take this seed, and instead of eating it, I plant it where it's going to be convenient for me, for it to grow later. Then, the plants that already had seeds that were slightly easier to harvest, like to begin with, just through natural variation, those were the ones that the humans collected because humans are lazy by nature. And that selected for the plants with fewer defenses and that were easier to harvest. If, plant species A has a bunch of thorns around its seeds so that, insects can get to it, but pesky humans can't, we're not going to domesticate that one,
Right.
With livestock, after we started growing the plants where we wanted them to be, because you'll notice it went dogs, then several species of crop plants, then livestock. Once we got the plants where we wanted them, we were able to build permanent settlements, right? Whole Fertile Crescent stuff. And also things like fences, instead of, having to go and hunt down these things that we like to eat, like cows and pigs and stuff like that. If we could find a way to get them inside the fence.
Once you do, I imagine that's, like, you said that kind of laughing, but like getting these things inside a fence and like willing to stay there and not hop out or like, just die as soon as they're in captivity. Like, that's miraculous.
Right. And like generally, this is kind of just thought experimenting because obviously this is really hard to know. Right. But like, if you get 50 horses in like, by fence, of course I'm meaning like very large area that you're like reasonably controlling, right?
Enclosures almost.
Yes, that's a better word. If you got 50 horses in there and some of them are mean, you're just gonna be like, okay, let's say cows because we eat those more often than we eat horses. If there's 50 cows in an enclosure and one of them's mean, right? You're like, man, I'm just going to kill that cow and eat that one first so I don't have to deal with it later. And that leaves the rest of them to have more time to reproduce with each other inside that enclosure.
Right.
Which then...
More resources themselves.
Exactly. And again, this is thought experimenting. People have more articulate hypotheses for how this happened, but that's the gist, right? And so this brings us to a couple of things to kind of close on. That's generally the process by which domestication works, right? So the three things that we're going to use to wrap up. First, the messy definition of domestication, other species that have domesticated things, and then a fun experiment that happened with domestication.
Okay.
So first, domestication is really messy because it happens to every species differently. I've kind of lumped them into groups, but with each species, it happens differently in its own kind of way. So for example, horses, like I said, we've domesticated horses for over 5,000 years. Donkeys, probably about the same, if not a little bit longer. We have never been able to domesticate zebras.
I remember this from the video. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
We just never have. Even, despite many attempts, that's not for lack of trying. Even recent attempts where we know a lot more and can be really intentional about it, zebras can be kind of tameable. So, like, you can get an individual to not be a jerk to you. But in terms of a whole population getting more used to humans, it just seems like they're really mean and strong-willed and hard to work with.
And that kind of goes with, this is more than just either human intentionality or, fun little accidents, but there have to be certain qualities of these species that just make them easier to domesticate, which like sounds obvious when you say it, but like, of course there's going to be some species that are just like, they just don't do well. Like, alligator domestication, I imagine, hasn't gone well for this. Really?
We'll talk about it in a second.
Okay. All right.
With zebras, on paper, zebras really should fit the bill, because the biggest thing is that it is a whole lot easier to domesticate social species than solitary species, because then their brains are already wired to kind of understand group dynamics, right?
Right.
And so you herd animals, horses, cows, sheep, great, wonderful. Dogs, also wonderful. They already have that social structure understanding built into their head. And if you can basically just, as the species, get through their heads that humans are in charge, they can understand that. And they can be like, okay, I'm cool with that. I'm chill with that. And zebras are fairly social animals. Like, they live in pretty good sized herds. So in theory, at least in that aspect, they should be okay. But they just seem to be really strong-willed and do not take direction well. And I'm sure there's much more information about why zebras haven't been able to, but that's, a further digression. There are also many, many species that are kind of domesticated. We've been working with lots of species for a long time, but not so much breeding them like we do cattle and pigs. So, for example, Asian elephants.
Okay.
People in, the parts of the world where they live have been working with elephants for like 4,000 years. Using them for everything from working, like lifting stuff that humans can't. Famously for war during Roman times. And also, I'm sure, the different, empires and things in India and China and Malaysia and Indonesia, places like that, used them for their militaries as well over the, millennia. But I don't really think anybody would confidently say that we domesticated elephants. They're smart enough to be teachable and trainable, but, they're still pretty likely to blow a hole in the side of a house,
Is that, they're teachable and trainable on an individual? Are they more tameable, like we were talking about?
Yeah, they're extremely tameable because they're very smart.
Right.
But again, the domestication part of it, this is where the definition's really fuzzy. Because it's especially now with zoos and things, there are, thousands of Asian elephants across the world that are very used to being fed by and being taken care of by humans. Have we domesticated elephants in zoos? I know a handful. No, I know a handful of zookeepers, and they'd probably say no.
Right.
But why that is something that is really hard to articulate. And to sort of further emphasize this point of what exactly is or does and does not count. So there's a Wikipedia page that lists the species of domesticated animals. And there's a subsection there titled Tame, Partially Domesticated, and Widely Captive Bred Animals.
Yeah, okay.
Which is about 5 times as long as the list of fully domesticated species. And it ranges from jellyfish to alligators to eagles to leeches to mealworms.
Yeah, okay. That seems to make sense. There are some animals that by their very nature are easier for humans to control, even if we're not able to change them on a species-wide scale.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Versus domestication, substantive changes over generations that are sticky have to occur.
Right.
Okay.
And so a large part of that list was things in the pet trade. So there were lots of reptiles, fish, birds, small mammals on there that have been captive bred for like 50, 60 years or so that are very tameable, like hedgehogs. You know, those are like a reasonably common pet. I have a pet leopard gecko. She doesn't try to eat me, you know. And, you know, there are lots of things on there that are very tameable and generally more predisposed to being around humans, but would basically do fine if you release them back into the wild, as evidenced by our massive invasive species problems around the world. Though some, including, you know, things like elephants, alligators, falcons, leeches, that have been used by people for thousands of years for non-pet purposes. Because, like, I remember looking through the list of domesticated things and being like, falconry, maybe this is just a media thing that makes me think this, but I'm like, I feel like we've been doing falconry for forever. But apparently they are not domesticated.
Oh.
And I don't...
What category do they fall into?
They're in that sort of... all of them were together. The tame, partially domesticated, widely captive bred. I don't know which one specifically they fall into.
Sure.
But I'm like, even the things that we like have jobs for, or in some cases like alligators, we farm those now. Not domesticated. From my experience with captive bred reptiles, though, there is absolutely a difference between, for example, wild-caught pet iguanas and captive-bred pet iguanas. Wild-caught ones are prone to trying to bite your fingers off at some point in their life, and they will do it. While captive-bred ones are at least less likely to do that. There is, like, a very notable behavioral difference if you can get a captive-bred individual versus a wild-caught individual. And so domestication, in my brain, kind of falls into the same boat as, what is a species? You know, we've had a number of episodes about why that's a very complicated question, where it's like, yeah, there probably is some kind of line that can be drawn somewhere, but no one can agree on where that line is.
Yeah, there's probably several lines that could be drawn, and, like, you couldn't say any of them are, like, definitively wrong.
Right, it's like, if we farm the things for food, is it domesticated like we do for alligators, or for alligator skin, like we do these days? If we're able to train it to do tasks for us, like falconry, does that count? Or is it simply a behavioral thing? Because if that's the case, my cats are not domesticated. At least one of them attacks anyone who's not me, my wife, or my baby. And the other one attacks us, even us, if we go near her while she's eating. So if it just doesn't attack people, my cats fail that. So are they domesticated? My wife would say probably not. So that's the fuzziness of domestication. Now on to other species besides humans that have domesticated things. And I'm very glad you asked this question earlier. The other things that we can say confidently have domesticated other species are all insects. Which, if you had to guess, insects are crazy.
Are we talking about, like, they were domesticated, or they were the domesticators?
Insects, domesticators.
Eric Andre meme of Hannibal Buress just saying whack.
So there are several species of insects that have domesticated various fungi species. The most famous ones are leafcutter ants.
Okay.
So leafcutter ants are super cool. I got to see some up close when I was down in Belize back in college. Their whole lifestyle is built on going out, like leaving the nest, cutting up leaves to take back to their nest, not for them to eat, but for them to chew up and use for fertilizer for the fungus that they grow in their colonies, that they then eat. So they don't eat the plants at all. They use the plants to grow fungus that they eat. And there are fungus species, so I think there's quite a lot of different species of leafcutter ants. And almost all of them have a fungus species that is unique to them. That fungus is not found anywhere else. Yeah. And it shows there are a handful of species of fungus that humans have domesticated, right? And it shows similar patterns to like the ones we've domesticated versus their wild cousins. The same sort of patterns between the ant funguses and like the closest non-domesticated relatives of that fungus that are in the wild. Similar like patterns that you see in their like changes in attributes, which is crazy. There's also some termite species that do this, around 50 or so. And then from what I could find, a single beetle species that does something kind of similar. Yeah. Where they're just fungus farmers. That is how they live their lives.
Fungus. Okay. I did not have that on my bingo card for today, but I'm glad we got there.
And so lastly, a fun experiment to help us sort of understand domestication a little better. So back in the days of the USSR, the year was 1952. A scientist named Dmitry Belyaev and his grad student, Lyudmil Trut, I think that's how you'd say that name, wanted to know more about how domestication of dogs happened and how it worked. So they basically decided to speedrun domesticating foxes.
Okay.
It's a very interesting story that we don't have full time to get into, but I encouraged you to look it up, but too long didn't read.
Is that ethical?
I mean, why not?
Okay.
Like, I'm sure that people can come up with reasons why not, but I mean, so they started off with an initial population of 30 males and 100 females that they got from fox farms. So these were being farmed for their fur. And so they didn't just go out and catch a whole bunch. They took some from farms that were already being like captive bred, but they were just kind of like left in enclosures. And then, when it was time for them to get killed for their fur, they would just get killed. But they went to these farms, said, "We would like foxes, please, thank you," and took the foxes. And they only let the tamest ones breed, and they selected for no other qualities. So that was the only thing that they cared about when allowing certain ones to breed or not. They basically evaluated each individual's tameness at several points throughout the first few months of each fox's life. So basically once per month after they were born, the foxes were exposed to humans trying to handle them, like trying to like pet them and give them food. And they were given a score of 1 through 3 based on how friendly they were. After about 8 months, that's about when foxes become like adults, they were given a final score. And only the ones with like the tamest score of the 3 scores were allowed to breed. Eventually, spoilers, they had to come up with a 4th level because the foxes became more tame than like the rules for the previous tamest score. They were showing like more tame things than
which I imagine that means that the experiment was a success.
Oh, it was like a resounding
they were
success,
able to.
Yes.
Okay.
Over the generations, the foxes became more tame, which was to be expected. That's what you were breeding for. However, they also gained traits that are typically associated with dogs, which were not being selected for. These were things that just happened along the way. For example, droopy ears. We talked about that at the beginning. Tails that curl over their back, like a Yorkie dog tail.
Huh.
That is not a like normal thing for really any dog. That's something that we bred into dogs. Being able to breed outside of their normal breeding season or like prolonged breeding season. Domestic dogs can breed pretty much whenever throughout the year, but normal natural species have breeding seasons typically.
Where you got to get it done then.
Yeah, but not these foxes. They, again, just a side effect of tameness, being able to breed outside of their breeding season. Large variations in fur color, as we see with domestic species. Larger litter sizes, which is also something I didn't mention before, but is also another thing. And loss of their normal musky smell. Foxes are very smelly animals.
That's wild. So in an attempt to just like get some tamer foxes, they like less smelly and more like basically cute and cuddly.
Yes, exactly. And they also did lots of chemical tests on the foxes over the generations. The foxes had higher serotonin levels in the brain, lower adrenaline levels, lower stress hormones, etc.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this experiment has been controversial for how much it can actually tell us about domestication of like outside of dogs. But if you have the government funding, because this was initially funded by the USSR, but it's as of like 2019. I believe the not the main guy, but the grad student. I believe she just died like 2 or 3 years ago.
Is this experiment still ongoing?
That I don't know. The most recent thing that I was able to see was in like the 20-teens. So like less than 10 years ago.
And you said it started in the 50s?
52.
Damn.
Yeah. They bred, all told, about 50,000 foxes. And so initially this was funded by the government of the USSR. Obviously, the Soviet Union collapsed. But then this experiment continued through that with American funding. At least joint American-Russian funding. And so, if you've got some funding to go out and captive breed 50,000 birds or alligators or whatever, could be worth a shot. I would really like to know what, I think they got through like 40 generations, which is also much easier to do with a small mammal like foxes compared to something like an alligator. Because those just live for a long time and can't breed the year they're born usually.
I just wonder what you could do with, like, you are domesticating alligators for what exactly? Like, tameness around humans, I guess. But also, like, could you breed, like, war alligators?
I don't think they would be the best candidate for that. Also on the list, though, of that tame, partially domesticated, whatever, were saltwater crocodiles, the largest reptile in the world. I don't know who's trying to breed those, because those, like, alligators at least are pretty lazy. Like, they're relatively slow moving. If you get bit by an alligator, it does happen, but they're not going out of their way to try to bite you. Saltwater crocodiles go out of their way to try to eat people. So.
Okay.
Yeah. We are very much on the menu for saltwater crocodiles, but people apparently breed those. I don't know why. But, yeah, so, domestication, very messy, very ill-defined, but extremely interesting, and has been arguably, like, after fire, probably one of the most important things that has led us to human civilization, because, like, that's how, for the longest time, we built anything larger than just, like, a small house, or... how we got food, to do any of the other stuff that we've done. So, yeah. Domestication, pretty cool. And I definitely didn't do it justice in this episode, but hopefully this piqued some interest.
I quite enjoyed this one. And this has been episode 171 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, that was Gavin, and we'll see you guys in a couple weeks for the next episode. Until then, take care, everybody.
This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Gavin Davidson and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Finella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.